What if I told you that everything you've been doing to fix your anxiety is actually making it worse? Right now, as you're watching this, you might be carrying tension in your shoulders. Maybe your jaw is clenched. Perhaps there's a knot in your stomach about something that hasn't even happened yet. You've probably tried deep breathing, positive affirmations, maybe even meditation apps that promise to calm your racing mind. But here's the thing that nobody tells you, the thing that ancient Buddhist masters understood thousands of years ago, but that seems to contradict everything our modern world teaches us about dealing with anxiety. You ready for this? The way to end anxiety isn't to fight it, fix it, or make it go away. In fact, trying to eliminate your anxiety is precisely what keeps you trapped in its grip. I know that sounds completely backwards, maybe even frustrating to hear, especially if you've been struggling with anxiety for years, trying everything you can think of to just feel normal again. But stick with me here, because what I'm about to share with you isn't another quick fix or band-aid solution. This is a fundamental shift in how you relate to your own mind, and it has the power to change everything. Let me start by telling you about a moment that happened to me about 5 years ago. I was sitting in my car in a parking lot, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I was supposed to go into a meeting, just a normal work meeting, nothing objectively dangerous or threatening, but my entire nervous system was screaming at me that something terrible was about to happen. My mind was racing with worst-case scenarios, each one more catastrophic than the last. And here's what I did in that moment, what I had been trained to do by years of well-meaning advice. I tried to calm myself down. I took deep breaths. I told myself everything would be fine. I tried to think positive thoughts, and you know what happened? The anxiety got worse, much worse. Because every technique I was using was built on a hidden assumption, an assumption that my anxiety was a problem that needed to be solved, an enemy that needed to be defeated, something wrong with me that needed to be fixed. And that assumption is where we all get stuck. Buddhism isn't a religion in the way most people think of religion. You don't have to believe in anything supernatural or give up your current beliefs. Buddhism at its core is a psychology, a science of the mind developed over thousands of years through careful observation of how human consciousness actually works. And when it comes to anxiety, Buddhist psychology has figured out something that Western psychology is only now beginning to understand. The problem isn't the anxiety itself. The problem is what we do with it, how we relate to it, and the story we tell ourselves about what it means. So let's talk about what anxiety actually is from a Buddhist perspective. Anxiety is energy. That's it. It's a sensation in your body, a pattern of thoughts in your mind, a stream of mental and physical phenomena arising and passing away moment by moment. It's not good or bad, not right or wrong. It just is. Now I know what you're thinking. My anxiety feels terrible. It stops me from doing things I want to do. How can you say it's not bad? And here's where we need to get really precise about something crucial. The unpleasant sensations you're experiencing, the racing heart, the tight chest, the worried thoughts, those sensations themselves are actually not the main source of your suffering. What creates the real suffering is your relationship with those sensations, specifically your desire for them to be different than they are, your resistance to them, your fear of them, your attempts to control or eliminate them. There's a teaching in Buddhism called the second arrow. The Buddha said that when an arrow strikes you, it hurts. That's the first arrow. That's the initial unpleasant experience, the sensations of anxiety arising in your body and mind. But then we shoot ourselves with a second arrow, and this one we do to ourselves. The second arrow is our reaction to the first arrow. It's our judgment about the anxiety, our story about what it means, our fear that it will never end, our shame about being anxious, our anxiety about being anxious. And that second arrow causes far more pain than the first arrow ever could. Have you ever noticed that sometimes you're not just anxious, you're anxious about being anxious? You're worried about the fact that you're worried? That's the second arrow. That's where the real suffering lives. Imagine you're about to give a presentation and you notice your hands are shaking. That's the first arrow, just a physical sensation. But then what happens? Your mind jumps in with commentary. Oh no, my hands are shaking. People are going to notice. They're going to think I'm incompetent. Why do I always get so anxious? What's wrong with me? That entire stream of thoughts is the second arrow. The shaking hands themselves might be mildly uncomfortable, But it's the story you're telling yourself about the shaking hands that creates the real spiral of anxiety. So here's the Buddhist approach, and this is where it gets really counterintuitive. Instead of trying to make the anxiety go away, instead of fighting it or fixing it or running from it, you do something radical. You turn toward it. You get curious about it. You investigate it with interest, not because you enjoy suffering, but because resistance is suffering and acceptance is freedom. When you stop resisting your anxiety, something remarkable happens. The anxiety is still there initially, but the suffering around it begins to dissolve. How do you actually turn toward anxiety? The first step is to recognize that anxiety isn't one thing. When you actually pay attention, you discover that what we call anxiety is actually a collection of constantly changing phenomena. There are physical sensations, tension in your chest, a fluttery feeling in your stomach, a pounding heart. There are thoughts, worried predictions about the future, catastrophic what-if scenarios. There are emotions, fear, dread, unease, and all of these components are constantly shifting, changing, arising and passing away moment by moment. When you start to see this, anxiety becomes less solid, less permanent, less overwhelming. Here's an exercise you can try right now. Bring to mind something that makes you anxious. Doesn't have to be your biggest fear, just something that creates a little worry. Now, instead of getting lost in the story about why you're anxious, just notice what's actually happening in your direct experience right now. Where do you feel it in your body? Is there tension somewhere? Does it stay the same, or does it shift? Don't try to change it, just observe it with curiosity. Now notice your thoughts. What is your mind saying? And here's the key part. Can you recognize that you're not that voice? You're the awareness that hears the voice. You're not the anxious thoughts, you're the consciousness that observes the anxious thoughts. There's a space between you and your anxiety. This is what Buddhists call mindfulness, but it's got nothing to do with the way mindfulness is often taught as a relaxation technique. Real mindfulness isn't about feeling calm, it's about seeing clearly. It's about recognizing the difference between what's actually happening and the story you're telling yourself about what's happening. It's about creating space between stimulus and response. And when you have that space, you have choice. Without that space, you're on autopilot. With that space, you can choose a different response. Let's talk about control, because this is where so many people get stuck. We live in a culture that tells us we should be able to control our inner experience. But Buddhism teaches something radically different. It teaches that the attempt to control your inner experience is itself a form of suffering, and that freedom doesn't come from gaining control, it comes from letting go of the need to control. This doesn't mean you become passive. It means you stop fighting reality. When anxiety arises, and it will arise because you're a human being with a nervous system, you don't make it a problem. You don't add the layer of suffering that comes from believing it shouldn't be there. There's a famous Buddhist teaching about the nature of suffering, and it all comes down to this. Suffering is wanting things to be different than they are. Every single moment of suffering comes down to some version of this wish. I want this to stop. I want to feel different than I feel. And anxiety is built on wanting something to be different. You want to not feel anxious. You want the future to be certain when it's not. You want to eliminate the possibility of bad things happening, which is impossible. And every one of these wants creates tension, creates resistance, creates suffering. So what's the alternative? The alternative is what Buddhism calls acceptance. Acceptance doesn't mean you like anxiety. It doesn't mean you want it to be there. Acceptance means you stop arguing with reality. It means you acknowledge what's actually true in this moment. Right now, anxiety is here. That's a fact. You can spend your energy fighting that fact, or you can acknowledge it and work with it. Acceptance is actually a position of strength. It's saying, okay, anxiety, you're here, I don't like it, but I'm not going to waste my energy pretending you're not here or trying to force you away. And here's something beautiful that happens when you genuinely accept your anxiety. It begins to lose its power over you. Because the power anxiety has isn't coming from the anxiety itself, it's coming from your fear of the anxiety. Most people aren't afraid of the physical sensations. They're afraid of what those sensations might lead to. They're afraid they'll lose control. They're afraid they'll go crazy. And so they live in constant vigilance, constantly monitoring for signs of anxiety. And this very vigilance keeps them anxious. But when you're no longer afraid of your anxiety, When you know you can feel anxious and be okay, anxiety loses its teeth. It's still uncomfortable, but it's no longer terrifying. So after that experience in the parking lot, I started studying Buddhist psychology and practicing meditation. At first I thought this approach was nonsense, just accept my anxiety. But I was desperate enough to try it. So the next time anxiety arose, instead of trying to calm down, I got curious. I paid attention to what anxiety actually felt like, and I discovered anxiety doesn't feel like one thing. It's constantly moving, constantly changing. One moment it's tightness in my chest, the next moment it's a thought, the next moment it's a flutter in my stomach. And when I stopped resisting it, it actually became less intense. Not because I was using some technique, but because I wasn't adding fuel to the fire anymore. Over time, I stopped being afraid of anxiety. I'm no longer terrified of it. I know I can feel anxious and be okay. And because I'm no longer afraid of it, I no longer organize my life around avoiding it. Let's talk about thoughts, because so much of anxiety lives in our thoughts. Buddhism has an interesting perspective on thoughts. Thoughts aren't true or false. They're just mental events, phenomena arising in consciousness. But we don't usually experience thoughts this way. We experience thoughts as truth, as reality. If you have the thought, I'm going to fail, you don't experience that as just a thought, you experience that as a prediction. And this is where we get into trouble, because we believe our thoughts, especially our anxious thoughts, without questioning them. But here's what mindfulness reveals. Thoughts are just thoughts. They're not facts. They're not reality. An anxious thought is just an anxious thought. It doesn't mean what it says is true. When you can see thoughts as thoughts rather than as truth, you gain incredible freedom. When the thought arises, what if something terrible happens? You don't have to start worrying. You can simply notice, oh, there's an anxious thought, and let it be there without engaging with it, without believing it. This brings us to another crucial insight. Most anxiety is about the future or the past. It's about what might happen or what did happen. It's almost never about what's actually happening right now. Right now, as you're watching this, is there an actual threat? Or is your mind just imagining potential future threats? In the vast majority of moments, if you're just present with what is actually happening right now, you're okay. You're breathing. You're alive. The problem is we're almost never fully present. Our minds are constantly time-traveling, and anxiety lives in that time travel. So one of the most powerful practices is coming back to now. When you notice yourself spiraling into anxiety, ask yourself, what's actually happening right now in this moment? Not what might happen, but what is actually real right now. Usually the answer is something very simple. Right now, I'm sitting in a chair. Right now I'm breathing. Right now I'm safe. The catastrophe you're imagining hasn't happened. You can only ever live in this moment. Why spend this moment suffering about a moment that doesn't exist yet? Does this mean you should never plan for the future? Absolutely not. Buddhism is about seeing the difference between practical preparation and useless worry. Practical preparation is action-oriented, asking what can I actually do right now and then doing it. Useless worry is spinning in your head, but not taking action. Real planning doesn't create anxiety, it reduces it. But if there's nothing you can do, or if you've already done everything you can do, then worry serves no purpose. Buddhism also teaches about impermanence. Everything changes. Everything is temporary. Nothing lasts forever. This is true for anxiety too. The anxiety you're feeling right now is not permanent. It arose and it will pass, always. But when you're in the middle of anxiety, it feels like it will last forever. This is an illusion. If you actually pay attention, you'll notice anxiety fluctuates. It comes and goes in waves. Even during a panic attack, the sensations rise and fall. When you really understand this, it changes everything. Because now when anxiety arises, you know it won't last forever. This doesn't make anxiety pleasant, but it makes it bearable. Let's talk about self-compassion. Many people with anxiety are incredibly harsh with themselves about being anxious. They judge themselves, tell themselves they should be stronger, and all of this self-judgment is the second arrow. Buddhism teaches metta, compassion, including compassion for yourself. When you're anxious, instead of beating yourself up, what if you responded to yourself with kindness? What if you could say, "This is really hard right now, I'm struggling and that's okay, I can be kind to myself"? Self-compassion makes you stronger, not weaker. When you're harsh with yourself, you create internal conflict. When you're kind to yourself, you create internal safety, and from that place you have more resources to deal with whatever you're facing. There's a practice called RAIN. R stands for recognize what's happening, recognize that anxiety is present. S stands for allow the anxiety to be there without trying to fix it. I stands for investigate with curiosity what anxiety actually feels like. And N stands for nurture yourself with compassion. This practice takes maybe a minute and completely shifts your relationship with anxiety from resistance to acceptance, from fear to curiosity. So, where do you start? The foundation is meditation, specifically mindfulness meditation. Meditation isn't about making your mind blank or stopping thoughts. Meditation is simply paying attention to your present moment experience with curiosity and without judgment. You sit down, you focus on your breath, and every time your mind wanders, you notice and gently bring your attention back. This trains your brain to be more aware, to notice what's happening, rather than being lost in automatic patterns. Start with 5 minutes a day, and when anxiety arises, this is your real practice. Instead of trying to make it go away, pause, get curious. Where do you feel it? What is your mind saying? Can you observe it without being consumed? Can you allow it to be there? This is the practice. One more thing. This approach might sound like accepting suffering and not doing anything, but that's not true. Buddhism makes a distinction between pain and suffering. Pain is unavoidable, it's part of life. Suffering is the layer of resistance and story we add to pain. Pain times resistance equals suffering. If you have pain but no resistance, you have pain but not suffering. So the Buddhist approach isn't about passively accepting suffering. It's about removing the resistance that creates unnecessary suffering, so you're left with the actual situation, which is usually much more manageable. And from that place of clarity, you can actually take wise action. This isn't passive. It's the most empowered position possible, because you're no longer wasting energy on internal conflict. You're working with things as they are, which is the only place any effective action can ever come from. I want to leave you with this final thought. The journey with anxiety isn't about reaching some destination where you never feel anxious again. That's not realistic, and honestly, it's not even the goal. The goal is to change your relationship with anxiety so fundamentally that it no longer controls your life. You become someone who can feel anxiety and still move forward, still take risks, still live fully. You become someone who understands that anxiety is just weather passing through your internal landscape. Sometimes it's stormy, sometimes it's calm, but you are the sky that contains it all. The practice I've shared with you today isn't easy. It requires patience and commitment, but it's simple. Every time you notice anxiety, you have a choice. You can follow your old pattern of resistance and avoidance, or you can pause, turn toward it with curiosity and compassion, and practice being present with what is. Each time you make that choice, you're rewiring your brain, you're building new neural pathways, you're training yourself in a new way of being. And over time, this practice accumulates, it builds, and one day you'll notice that anxiety doesn't have the same grip on you anymore. Not because anxiety went away, but because you changed. You became bigger than your anxiety. You remembered that you are not your thoughts, you are not your feelings. You are the awareness that witnesses all of it. And that awareness is vast, peaceful and unshakable. That's the Buddhist way to end anxiety. Not by eliminating it, but by transforming your relationship with it so completely that it can no longer diminish your life. Thank you for watching.